add from my introduction. First of all, I answer to Griff or James Griffin. That's absolutely fine. The second thing is actually my expertise is in growing markets and building brands. It's why I love listening to Rory, but actually how we do it through people and collaboration. And actually maybe one thought that I would leave as we go into this chat now is particularly with the challenges in FMCG, what I'm really looking forward to in this session, but where my passion is about is how we collaboratively use our experience to crack some of those big issues. And personally, particularly with the next generation coming through, how we get our mojo back into the industry is something I'm very passionate on. We have a brilliant panel. Andy's already introduced, but I'm going to, in a moment, I'll get them to do a little bit more of an introduction as well as share their thoughts on Rory. Just a couple of other things before we start. So it is going to be a 40-minute session that we're going to have. We're blatantly going to run out of time. So what I would say is we've got lots of chat time, break time, out and about in the next day and a half. So please let's not stop the conversations here. Let's keep them going. Do come and grab either of any of us or all of us, and we keep the conversations going. The other thing is we'll initially start the conversation here. I know Desi's already demanded to have a question from the floor. We'll then try and reach out to you guys, time depending. So maybe just to get us started and warmed up, and perhaps you guys at the same time can do a bit more of an introduction about yourselves. Maybe we'll start left, going round to right. You've just heard a very interesting session from Rory. So maybe a little bit more about yourselves and maybe one or two thoughts that you've got coming out from the session with Rory. Starting on the left there.
Thanks, James. Yeah, first of all, Rory, he's disappeared.
Gone.
Okay. So I think, first of all, it was a neuronal fire to the brain, creating a lot of synapses. So a lot of key takeaways. That was really an amazing session. As the topic today is circled around RGM. One topic one sentence that I wrote down is, do you want to win arguments or solve problems? And I think in a lot of transformations that we're doing, this is actually one of the key pitfalls there are in bringing speed into the business. So I really like that quote, but a lot of more.
And anything you want to add about yourself and your background?
Yeah, thanks.
Apart from having a cold.
Yeah, I'm not Reckitts anymore. I used to be 17 years. I spent 17 years with Reckitts, so I'm proud to be a RGM transformation consultant today, since May last year. And I'm very happy that one of my favorite clients is here today, Walker Shortbread from Scotland. So Sarah, great that you're here today. And I give a more thorough introduction in my presentation, so saving time.
Very good.
Cool. So I'm Scott McBeath. So I was in the global RGM team within Unilever. So it's about rolling out the best practice capabilities and everything. Prior to that, a lot of commercial experience across various companies. So between commercial strategy, category management, customer management, pretty much done it all. The benefit of going twice is when you choose the same quote, it becomes a bit embarrassing. But I also wrote down the whole thing about winning arguments versus solving problems, and it's quite relevant at the moment, because if you look at a lot of retailers and the behaviour they're demonstrating, there's a lot of asks coming through from retailers in terms of, hey, we need more margin, whether it's for, in the UK, national insurance or different factors. You're pretty much getting given an ask, so we need 2%. And different manufacturers are taking different responses to that. So some are blatantly pushing back, saying, hey, look, not our responsibility, you're responsible for your labour costs. Others are maybe working a little bit with it, but putting some conditionality on it, and others are basically giving it away. And I think it's all about reframing it. So what is, say, Tesco really after? So they're after margin improvement. So how can you deliver a plan that delivers their margin improvement, maybe in a different way? So coming back to the reframing that Rory talked about. So again, I'd call out the same thing in terms of winning an argument versus solving a problem.
Very good. Yeah, my personal takeout was that I love the reframing in the reverse benchmarking. I thought that was brilliant. And you can do that in everything, right? Even in your own family issues even. Let's keep going.
So James Stok, most recently I was at Coca-Cola Hellenic in RGM, before that Diageo and Unilever, so a Unilever theme going through here. Worked in different roles globally, regionally, in market, originally in sales, so kind of what always comes to my mind is how am I going to take this to a customer, how are we going to sell this into customers. I'm still getting used to the idea of being a veteran, an RGM veteran, and so I like the idea of the Saga holiday limit coming down to 49. That's good. And also the farmers market being a shit Tesco Express as I wander around on Sunday, which I tend to do. Probably the biggest thing for me that really stuck out, on top of what you guys have said, was the explore versus exploit, the Bs, and really thinking about efficiency versus growth. And ultimately, again, coming back to a customer point of view, they need growth. And if we get too hung up on efficiency and we're not showing them growth, we're not doing our job. And it's revenue growth management for a reason, but often we can get so hung up on the efficiency part. So how do we make sure we keep that focus on driving growth as well?
And finally.
Thanks, James and James. So my name is Nick Jones. 30 years in FMCG, so like James, the war veteran is resonating with me. In those 30 years, 15 years probably in frontline sales, leading teams in grocery and wholesale, but then the sort of last 15 more internal, looking at transformation, putting in place trade promotional management systems, processes, change management, and really embedding a culture of learning. And the parts of Rory's presentation that resonated with me was this averaging out, the challenges of averaging out, and what we've been trying to do at BRITVIC in the last few years is really look under the bonnet at individual promotional performance. How many of you seen the film Any Given Sunday that came out in 1999? Al Pacino does a fantastic 10-minute locker room inspirational speech to an American football team. And very much, life's a game of inches. And for us in BRITVIC, we've had great success with the price lever, but we really need to drive efficiency with our promotional spend. And those inches are absolutely everywhere. And by building a learning culture around all of those individual promotions and trying to optimise every pound, that's where we feel there is success to be had, to add value to the P&L, not just for BRITVIC but also for our customers. And then the second one was around the Bs. We can get lost in data, it can be overwhelming. Our sales teams, we employ people to be inspirational, a bit maverick, we don't want to tie them up in process. So, allowing 20% of them to go and innovate, try new things, but put a framework around that so that there is a degree of learning and control. Was a nice sort of link there that Rory talked about.
Very good. You've just spoken there about lost in data. So where I want to start is with data. And the challenge of how we are overwhelmed with data, even in smaller organisations. These days, there's so much available open public data. So data overload and not being able to see the wood from the trees. Now, maybe starting with Gerald and then Nick. What's some of the challenges you found in trying to seek out the magic one number, the one important KPI, and how do you manage that data overload in an organisation?
To be frank, I'd like to trim the question down a little bit because I'm a big fan of good in, good out. And I think data, you can get easily overwhelmed with the wealth of data in certain markets, in other markets not. But what I experienced, especially in Reckitts, and they're very strong on the trade investment side, is align the data. Look at true trade investment structures across the customer. So apples to apple comparisons, gross to net comparisons, one list price equaling to a 3 net price. So I think that to me are two very hard to be broken bones. But when you have that right, you have your internal data structure right, then it's still time to look into promotion, price pack architecture, where this is not of such a high relevance.
Very good. Anything from you, Nick? You started that conversation. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think we were very ambitious at BRITVIC initially, putting in a new TPM solution, thinking we can make this work for every retailer within grocery. What became, I think, apparent very quickly is quality of data, which Gerald has mentioned. So we really focused on the top 4, the top 10 packs, classic 80-20 rule, and I encourage all of you to sort of take that approach. And putting good quality data in is absolutely essential. Then in order to make those optimised decisions, I think that'd be probably the learning.
When we were chatting yesterday, we had a couple of draft sessions as a panel to whet the appetite of the discussion. Actually, a lot of us were reflecting on how much time we'd collectively spent implementing new systems and systems rollouts, and actually the reflection we were all having was actually that in itself can lead you completely away from the data, because all of the time that's spent, and particularly in smaller business units or smaller organisations, enormous amounts of time of training up and using systems, which is entirely not the same thing as data insight and trying to find one KPI. And in some cases you're often better using legacy systems but focusing on, a bit like Rory's point, on the emotional and empathy delivering and driving of capability in the organisation. And that's actually next question. So maybe from you two, Scott and James, from a capability point of view, what's your view, so it's a big question, of RGM in the industry right now and capability generally? There's a lot of talk about it's super important, metrics of everything, commercial pressures, but what's the capability like right now?
I think
Maybe Scott, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's varied. So it depends what organisation. Different organisations have different strengths in different areas. If we went back, say, 5 years, you would argue that pricing wasn't strong with many suppliers. I think if you look now, many have certainly practiced the dark art in terms of leveraging it to get cost price increases. I guess the step change is how you move from a cost-based scope in terms of how you do pricing to how you start thinking about an elasticity scope. So how do you show up against all your competitors? How do you show up against the market? And then taking that further into a value creation space where you're thinking about the activation scopes of what are all the good things that you're activating against as a business that justify your price premium, and then how do you get your sales teams on board with selling that vision through retailers. So I think it's about cohesively bringing all of that together. So pricing is foundational and fundamental. If you look at the other levers though, I think as we've taken so much pricing recently, the other levers become even more important, and it's very varied out there in terms of the ability to deep dive on promotions. Do we actually understand what we're investing behind? Pack price architecture. A lot of people still don't have their supply chains on board with RGM and bringing them on that journey, and the value that having good complexity in your range. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of simplification you want to have, but how do you strip out the bad complexity and insert some good complexity into your range? So definitely lots of opportunities out there to build capability.
And James, maybe from your side then, capability, has it been linear and improved consistently? What have you found, or has it ebbed and flowed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, during my time at Diageo, I was in a global role, so you'd look across markets, and even within Diageo, there's such a variety from country to country, market to market. Within the same organisation, we had a global sales team that in theory was sending out, the same playbooks or the same training to everybody, but then how it actually got adopted and used and embedded really varied. So even within one organisation globally, capability varied. I think, and again, as people change and as organisational changes happen, that can knock you backwards in terms of what people are able to do, who does what, because the experience goes, or people aren't quite clear on who should be doing what if there's a big change come in. So that can be a real disruptor and actually knock you backwards. I think also in the last few years, with all of the global commodity inflation, we've almost become quite reactive. We have to put price through. And it's almost now, with the market dynamics in a lot of markets where volume is much harder to come by, there is still some inflation there. We need to get back to being proactive and using the 5 levers together. We can't just rely on price, because that's going to be used out of a lot. but then we have to get smart about how do we use the 5 levers together. How are we going to? And for me, it's like, how do we drive category growth? So coming back to the basics of driving category growth, more people, more often, spending more, and how do we use RGM levers holistically to help us do that? Because that's how we're going to really engage better with the retailers. That's what they expect their suppliers to be doing for them.
And speed of deployment, we chatted about this one yesterday. We were talking in Unilever. Certainly in a UK example, we found that the marketers were actually in some ways more engaged with what in Unilever they call NRM, RGM, than actually, and the sales guys in some cases were blockers. Maybe from any of you guys, any examples of good or bad practice, maybe from your experience of speed to market, in terms of capabilities, where it worked well and where it didn't work well, and maybe learnings. I can see your microphone flinch there. You wanted to get in there.
No. What I've experienced in many companies is that actually the UK is quite advanced because they are very data wealthy. You have, just to mention Dunnhumby data, you have a data richness that is not acquainted to many markets. So there, the speed of RGM is stellar, is best. But also, on the contrary side, the knowledge and the data is high in France and Germany, for example, but they are contract markets. So the realization and also the willingness of the business to adopt and to say, yes, this is opportunity, but we don't spar. So that slows down the process. And the third point is, what I've seen in the transformations is that small markets, satellite markets, data poor, they really lean in when a central and global team supports them, and so the proportion of the net revenue and gains is much higher than in the bigger markets.
You've just spoke. Well, anybody else want to?
Yeah, I'll come in on that.
The microphones are flying up now.
Yeah. So in terms of making those decisions and being able to respond to the customer really quickly, we've wanted to build a spirit of collaboration, and not a learning culture whereby those promotions and that detail, the concept of an ROI, our account managers had that. They knew that was in their Excel spreadsheet. They could turn that around in a couple of hours and get back to their customer. What the new TPM solution has done for us at BRITVIC is be able to put in a consistent application of what do all the promotions look like. And the real challenge has been, how do we not slow the organisation down, but how do we have that insatiable curiosity with the account manager to understand the decisions that they're making. I'm sure there will still be many who are replicating Robinsons at £1 for 12 weeks because they did it last year. So hey, guess what? We'll do it again. One of my BRITVIC colleagues is smiling over there. I think we now sell it for £1.
We saw the competition thing earlier, so let's move on.
Yeah. So it's that ability to make decisions quickly, but spend that time collaborating on the data so that we can consciously find those inches.
I'm going to do reverse
benchmarking.
So I've seen it where you roll out the principles of RGM and how it supports sales and selling more for more, and it's going to be something really important to the business. Monthly routines are going to have the metrics in there and everything, and then we're behind on volume. We need to get volume, and it all becomes about volume. The day-to-day conversation is suddenly back to volume, so that the consistency from leadership and what leadership are asking day-to-day is such a key enabler, and if it's not there, it can really undermine lots of other good change management systems, training, whatever else has gone on, but it's got to be within the culture, day-to-day culture, because if it's about leadership, you care about what your boss asks you and what your boss's boss asks you. If they ask you about volume, don't care about RGM.
Yeah, it's interesting. In all of the conversations we've been having in the prep time, very quickly we realised we talk about data, and you think a lot of the focus on data is KPIs, but very quickly you get into an engagement and an empathy and how you drive cultural change. I've got one more question I'm going to ask these guys. I'm just going to give you a bit of a heads up into the audience. Start thinking about the questions you might want to grill and interrogate us with, because I'll reach out to you guys in a moment. But maybe one other thing based on capability to discuss. A bit of an interesting topic. We've worked across our experience, we've worked in both global and local functions. Any views with RGM on what works best to embed capability? Having a small expert team that really drives the change, or actually not operating that model and embedding it into the organisation? Maybe at this point we go wild. Who wants to jump in first? Who's going to flinch their microphone? Go on, Scott, you go.
I'm going to talk about it later.
For the record, Scott was in the global team.
So I think there's definitely a role for understanding where are the bright spots in your organisation. So where are the good things to start building from? And then once you identify where those bright spots are, think about how you start to make those people in those markets the heroes, to really take it through the organisation and show them the better way and show them the path for growth. So it's about building on what successes are already there. If you don't have successes, it's about building that initial light and practicing some things. But yeah, definitely start with success and build from that rather than going and analysing problems.
I think a lot of companies are very acquainted to work in silos. And central knowledge is great, but the markets don't lean in. If somebody from a central team says, hey, you've got 3 million there, and they say, well, I make it a 5 because I need to execute it. So if you give the markets the stage and the audience and to shine and share their best practices, then you're on a winning route. And to summarize, to me, RGM is a school of thought. It's not the central knowledge.
Yeah, and my experience in Asia, where RGM was less developed, would show that you need some structure centrally, but it's got to be owned by the local teams.
Yeah, I think if anyone's starting out wanting to build a capability in promotional optimization, one of the key metrics we wanted to hold true is keeping our sales teams 80% externally focused. So we have put a small team in place to really learn and work alongside the sales teams to collaborate and get to the relevant insights in a consistent manner.
James?
I've been on both sides of the fence. So the ivory tower, we're trying to kind of share best practice globally. The other one's always wrong. So I think one thing that Diageo did for a period, I'm not sure they're still doing it now, was often it can feel like the global sales team in theory is there to support you, but it feels like you're just having to send them information, data, this, that. It's like, okay, hold on, which way round is this relationship? One thing that did work quite well in Diageo when I was there was they had what they called a frameworks team. It's basically 4 people who were spotted globally, who were very good at practicing things. And they were then sent to different countries to work with them for 12 weeks and actually learn through doing, basically. So they would help them.
So it's a sprint type approach.
Sprint type approach. It actually came from Unilever. Somebody who joined us had been at Unilever and took the sprint type approach. But these 4 people would go to their different countries in a team, and they'd take the team along with them, lead them. And so when they left, and basically rather than saying, you need to get 4% improvement in your ROI, it's more like, what's the problem beer you have? What problems you need to solve in beer? How can we help you? Let's apply this framework to help you solve your problem. Take them through the analytics and the questions to ask along the process. But you're doing it with the team. So when you leave, the team then goes on to their next sprint because they know they've built the capability
and it lives on.
Practicing the muscle, and it lives on, so it becomes more enduring, if you like. That was one thing that did seem to work quite well.
Very good. So any questions bubbling from the audience? One at the back there.
I'll shout loud.
Is there a
Lots of microphones on the stage. Just in terms of capability building in general, I think my perspective of RGM is people tend to use it as a breadth opportunity to progress their roles in sales or finance or anything like that. Do you guys have any thoughts or insights on how we can better encourage people to craft a career in RGM rather than utilise it as a stepping stone to progress in another function?
You must have seen my notes, because that's a great question, and that was one which we'd kind of teed up around, how do you build careers, or do you build careers in RGM? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, if I reflect on my time at Unilever and how they've evolved around the topic, if I look at the customer strategy and planning side of the organisation, pretty much every single role at the global level, the top person is ex-NRM. So it's definitely helped build their career and outside. I find a lot of the people coming into NRM, they generally like connecting with lots of different teams, and you get a totally different vibe in the team versus elsewhere. So we found a lot of people who really love staying in RGM, and it was more about how do we create variety by perhaps switching their specialism or switching which departments they work with to create that variety, as opposed to necessarily wholly new roles.
Gerald, you look like you.
No, I just wanted to reverse the question, because actually it's not bad, right? If you have future GMs and SDs who went through the school of thought of RGM, so, but yes, you're right, the time staying within the team is rather short then.
Maybe one insight I would say I found, particularly with my experience in Asia, is sometimes NRM, a particular function can start to dominate RGM, and that's actually bad news. In fact, one of the topics we're going to discuss next, if we have enough time, is cross-functional engagement. But actually, it's more important that you have it across functions, and it lives and breathes with marketers, back to the consumer need almost that James was alluding to just now, as well as finance and sales. It's bad news if one function is seen as something that belongs to one function. Any more questions?
So I was just going to add on that as well. Because it's a good question. I think having people who've been in RGM or NRM and then going through the organisation is a good thing, because RGM shouldn't just be done by the RGM team. Sometimes as well, conversely, actually getting people to come into RGM from sales and marketing can be as big a problem in terms of they don't think they have the skills, they don't see what the benefit is to them. So it can work both ways as well.
Very good.
Just the final build, just around this question of the theme of democratising RGM for our best sales teams is something that we've currently been working on. So rather than it having to be the dark arts of 3 or 4 in the central team, there's 3 or 4 models that we're rolling out now, which is sort of promo uplift model, a cannibalisation model, a redemption model. These are intuitive models that the account managers can use in their planning of promotions, and that's definitely, I think, going to help people in sales build their RGM capability without actually being in RGM.
Thanks. Any more questions from the floor? Sorry, Scott. Cutting you off there. No, I'm cutting you off.
I was just going to have... sorry.
Yeah, go.
No, I was just going to say, one thing to think, probably more going down the capability route, but it's about how you speak in the language of that department. I think too often I've seen RGM teams do training where you might have 200 slides of 200 different ways to analyze something. That doesn't help a salesperson have a conversation with his retailer. So it's also thinking what is actually relevant for that audience and simplifying it down so you actually get that cut through as well.
So I know this might be a bit turkey's vote for Christmas, right? But should success of an RGM team not be that you don't need an RGM team?
Bloody brilliant question. Yeah.
That's why I'm here. So Unilever got rid of their global RGM team as an example because they felt it was embedded enough through the rest of the organisation.
That's why we have half-price Hellmann's in the market.
Yeah.
And Hellmann's is 80% market share in Ireland.
It slips very quickly.
Expandability, obviously. Any more thoughts?
So, one question here, sorry. Ajay Kalanova, Kellogg's, or soon to be Mars, hopefully. Just one question for you guys. I mean, you got about 100 years of experience just on the 5 chairs over there. And I know, Scott, you kind of touched upon price pack architecture and the connection to supply chain. So I would love to get some perspective from you guys on the integration of RGM with other functions. What have you seen working? Where have you seen it not working? And if you could expand on that supply chain piece, I think that would be tremendously helpful. Thank you.
I think the point that James touched on in terms of the sprint processes for us was really key to unlocking that cross-functional engagement. So when we ran the workshops, we made sure we had representation across the organisation. And I think it's when you have people together in the room together from different functions that they start to understand what are some of the challenges or why something wouldn't work or would work from different perspectives. So whether it's from the marketing to the consumer to the salesperson in the store or online or supply chain in terms of efficiency, it's having the people together definitely helps a long way. And then it's thinking about what are some of those key KPIs. If you can get an organisation to have consistent KPIs across the business, so they're pulling in the same direction. So if simplification is the objective, then what is that reduction like? And do the marketing and sales and other function, finance, have those KPIs alongside supply chain? Really works well as well.
I might bring you an example there actually. When I was in Southeast Asia, we were working with some quite small teams, markets like Cambodia, etc. And interestingly, what it came down to wasn't about templates and small teams were incredibly busy. But what actually was about hearts and minds, and a little bit building on Scott's point about language and the benefits and being very tangible in the benefits. Now, the interesting thing is if you spent a little bit of time invested, particularly into smaller teams, delivers often bigger returns than spending inordinate amounts of times into the larger teams. And because of movement, particularly in larger organisations, often those smaller teams move around and start to act as ambassadors themselves because of the way that the smaller teams are much closer in working. So just an interesting thought, bit reverse benchmarking as an idea of how you do it. Nick, I think you flinched there. Did you want to add more?
Yeah, I think it's still in progress in terms of being able to say we've locked benefits in, but the forecast accuracy measure, which I think has been largely in BRITVIC, GB, it's down to the supply chain team to meet with the account managers, make sure they're forecasting the sum of the parts correctly through the S&OP process. But what we've identified through some of the new modelling tools is, again, this game of inches pieces. If we get the right pre-planning and we really sweat the post-analysis, we will build a more accurate forecast, and of course that flows through then down to efficiencies in procurement and planning.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and definitely not one I've seen perfected. I think what really helps is where you've cross-functionally got a common vision, common goal, and you understand the broader context, not just your silo, not your part of it. I think where I remember even back in Unilever days when I started, and, I was in sales, but I'd have a forecast accuracy KPI as part of my KPIs because it was important. We couldn't store lots of frozen food; it cost us a fortune if we got the forecast wrong. So I need to understand that, but vice versa. The demand and supply team need to understand we need to hit sales numbers, and sometimes that meant doing promotions or introducing different packs. So it's kind of being able to have that. Yes, you've got your role, but seeing the bigger picture, having a common bigger goal, and having some joined up metrics that cross across you, so you're pointing better in the same direction. And then just, again, my experience was actually back in Unilever days when we worked in kind of category teams within frozen food, and you'd be working cross-functionally, and it's almost like you're not sales. I'm part of the meals category team, or the fish, or the veg. Not very glamorous, I know. But then day to day, you're just working demand planner, finance, marketing, sales, commercial, or our GM team, as it would be called now, insights, and you're all just one team working together as a mini business unit. That's something that I've never really seen since, if I'm honest.
Which triggers a thought around TPM. It's a super process. It isn't just one team's responsibility. The big learning, I think, at BRITVIC, which I'd share, is it became the value realisations problem. But actually, 80% of the benefit was going to come through sales teams planning in the moment and collaborating more effectively. And the finance team saw skin in the game because they could see that the accrual management was improving, and therefore we weren't releasing huge rebates every month because we were over forecasting, and it's becoming an input into the S&OP process as well. So what that has meant from an exec perspective is a need to look at the overall business scorecard and ensure that those metrics all line up and are all in service of efficiency, with TPM being a a contributor.
You just touched on senior leadership there. Now, it's interesting, we were discussing this, so if you're dealing with very senior leaders, now senior leaders are critical for driving RGM, but it's a blessing and a curse. And that'd be a bit interesting maybe to hear your views on, how, I guess two questions, which is one, how do you engage and upskill senior leaders, but also how do you manage senior leaders when you're actually also trying to embed things throughout the organisation? Go on, Gerald,
Well,
you go.
I come to that in more depth in my presentation, but Rory's sentence also stuck with me is, how many horses can you save, right? So senior leaders...
Framing, yeah.
Yeah, if you take the 200 charts and share with them, this is RGM, they will drown. But they will very quickly understand what wealth of business navigation RGM brings on a top line, L1 level. They don't need to go to the L5 level. They need to understand on a high level, what are the key KPIs that are at my fingertips, which business is red, yellow, green, and what do I do with the money? Because I get productivity, cash into my earnings model, and that's I think all they need to know at that point. Simplifying.
Any more thoughts, maybe examples that you've experienced?
Yeah, as part of our Diageo days in the global team, we had a training session for GMs and LTs. We were, again, Ivan Menezes was the CEO at the time, and he was leading from the front on RGM. He said, look, I want the exec team to be doing this. I want us to understand it. And often, ultimately, you put yourself in the place of the GM, they've got numbers to hit. So how is RGM going to help them? That's what they want to know. Not make my life more difficult. I know my boss is going to be asking me about it, so I need to know how to do this, because Ivan's all over it. And the biggest thing for them was like, I don't need to know all the detail, but tell me what questions I need to be asking my teams. What are the things I need to be doing from a leadership point of view and routines, and particularly it's the questions. What questions should I be asking that are different to today? Because if I'm asking good questions, then that's going to help give the team the direction they need. The metrics are really clear from the top down, from Ivan down, kind of the 2 or 3 kind of that were in the scorecard. But it's like, what questions do I need, and how do I set my team up for success?
I think your last point on choosing the right metrics that you're sharing with senior leadership that are simple is really good. In my experience, if you can demonstrate progress and consistent progress on that in a way, I'm trying to think of the politically correct way of saying this, but that keeps senior leaders from getting too involved into the nitty-gritty while you upskill and develop the teams. Now, maybe, I don't know how we're doing time, but this could be the last 5. Yeah, brilliant. Very good. So, well, let me go to the last question in a moment. Let's take the question from the floor first.
All right. Hi, this is JK. I'm from Kraft Heinz, part of the global RGM team. So, yes.
Scott, you got a friend.
Question. So, what's your most successful transformation that you led, and how did you achieve it?
Oh, that's a great question.
I want to present it.
He's got to get out a jail free card. Okay, Scott.
So on the trade investment side of things, we set out a global challenge in terms of how do we realise 750 million of benefit in a single year through trade investment improvements. And I think there was a big job to be done in terms of how you bring the countries on board. So first, how do you get those sales directors on board with what part are they going to contribute? So that started with setting the big, hairy, audacious goal, but then starting to show them what their role is in terms of doing that, but then starting to chunk it down in terms of how they could approach it, where they could get support. And I think initially top level was very much on board, the country managers a little bit less so, but through consistent reinforcement, showing them the better way, reinforce what they're doing, so that constant communication, but also that constant reinforcement by senior leadership around the goals and everything like that, actually brought the company on board the journey. And I think for the first time in about 15 years, we went through a year where we didn't have trade investment drift, but we actually contracted on our global trade investment, which, as I say, 15 years is a consistent thing. So it definitely turned the ship around, and subsequently much better controls from having that attention. But in terms of big, hairy, audacious ones, that's probably the big one.
So James and Nick, he's bought you some time, so Your examples?
I heard a statistic that 50% of TPM implementations can fail, which is quite scary when you agree to lead a commercial transformation around TPM. And it's fair to say when we went live with the foundations, the bare bones. And I think my learning is having that confidence to go on a journey of learning and discovery in those first 18 months, 2 years. Scott and I were talking last night. The trade promotional analytics do not come out of the box on day one. It takes 12 to 18 months to build the quality and the robustness of the inputs to really then get into trusted data, trusted insights. So I'm pleased to say, and I hope my BRITVIC Ireland colleagues would say the same, our TPM implementation has been a success, but it's been painful at times, but it has required constant course correcting and keeping the belief of the senior management that foundations are solid, and we're just learning and improving one step at a time.
I think for me, kind of success was when you got GMs talking about it. So in Colombia or in the Netherlands, the GM would actively be saying, "This is great, look what it's done." So it's not us kind of saying stuff, but it's coming back to you. And they want more support, and people coming and asking you for support. That's when you know you're doing a good job. And if you're not getting asked for support, there's a problem. And it's being repeated. So again, we deployed things globally. Some markets took it, adopted it, GMs loved it. We've done the same deployment in other markets. They didn't repeat it, GMs didn't talk about it. So it's really hard to say one size fits all. But it's really where you feel like actually people are talking about it back to you. That's a great sign of success.
And the functional ownership of that end-to-end process is really key. We realised after 12 months that some of the wheels were starting to wobble. I remember going to internal audit. We audit all of our big spended projects, and this was a big investment project. So managed to drag internal audit into a bit of a collaboration to actually open the eyes up to the senior team that we were still too siloed. And we needed to get back to a core set of metrics and a core set of ownership and governance so that each team was playing in position. Again, another really important learning and a real eye-opener actually for the exec, because ultimately they don't want to know the detail and the process. That's not their job, right? But it's only through the learning by doing that I think the examples of where the downstream dependencies were causing challenges because they weren't being done on time with the right level of accuracy was preventing us from getting those inches over the line.
And I've got an example from the oral care category. We haven't got time to go into it, but it really reminds me of what Rory was talking about with the Odeon Cinema example of how you, with the super premium setup and how you reframe from a price pack architecture. So maybe just in terms of a final question before Andy comes and beats us up for ruining his agenda. Maybe just with going back to sort of where Rory left off and then where we continued, in terms of the next generation of RGM, if there's kind of one message that you wanted to leave for the next kind of generation, what's the one tip that you would say from a personal point of view? I hope I'm not trashing your presentations for later, but what's the one sort of message that you might leave for inspiring a next generation of RGM so that there's a bunch of war vets in 20 years' time that will come up and be as passionate as we've been?
I think RGM aggregates data. Data is ubiquitary. Data should break down silos and make a company what a company actually should be. Cross-functional collaboration with each competencies.
Yeah, very good.
I think for me it's the art of the what if. So what is the possibility that can be put out there? And I think that resonates with what Rory was saying in terms of you can drown yourself in data and still not have the answer, and it's probably that uncommon insight that unlocks something. So what is the possible future? What would it take to realise that future and focus on that?
And from this side?
Create the framework to innovate, fail fast but learn faster. Absolutely critical in the last few years.
I think for me it's around driving different customer conversations. if we can do that, then we're going to be successful.
Very good. So we've run out of time. We've got so many more questions. Please do continue to keep the conversations flowing in the break. Grab us. Happy to share more examples. And thank you very much for the questions from the floor.